Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the part 2 in the series of proofs for the existence of God and the divinity of the Torah. Okay, so last time we brought 4 approaches, and there's a question in one of those approaches, the third approach, which we're going to go into a bit more today. And you can look at these as 6 different approaches which answer a different question. How do we know that the story, the narrative of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai has got down to us intact? Okay. So, as we know, the series we're working on at the moment is we're going to trying to, please God, have a series of lectures proving the existence of God, and then another series proving the divinity of the Torah. It just so happens that the most important one of the lot, which is the historical proof, which is the one where according to the Torah, this is the one which we're meant to know about God, is by keeping intact the tradition of the God's revelation at Mount Sinai, and also the 10 plagues and the miracles at the Red Sea, etc., and the story, the narrative of the dwellings, the miraculous living which they lived in the desert for 40 years. Right, all of that we're meant to take as part of our tradition. We're commanded to know this and to pass it down to our children. Right, so that's why this is the most important out of all the proofs. However, there are many other categories of proof, like for example, the divinity of the Torah. You'd have things like prophecy. You have the wisdom of the Torah, how the Torah knew certain things in the natural realm, which if there was someone who wrote it themselves, they couldn't know about it with presumably more primitive knowledge of science and things like that. And also different proofs of God's existence, theological proofs. What's it called? I can't remember what it's called now. Yeah, they've got philosophical proofs, things like that. What's it called, that one? Ontological proof, that's it, yeah. So we've got a whole different set of proofs of both. But as I said, the proof of the historical proof that God revealed himself openly to the whole nation of the Jewish people 3,337 years ago, that is the basis of the religion. It's not just a proof, it's actually the basis of the religion itself. Okay, so last time we tried to demonstrate 4 approaches to show the reliability. And remember, when we talk about proof, go back to a previous lecture where we spoke about how we know anything, and then proof, it should be in the same playlist as the proofs series. Whenever we're looking for proof for something, you can look for mathematical proof, which is 100%, obviously based on axioms, which you have to assume, so it's kind of not even 100% that, right? However, when we're looking at a practical choice between is there a God, is there not a God, and that causes our lives to diverge absolutely radically, so we have to make a choice. You can't just say, well, it's 95% chance there's a God and 5% that maybe you can explain away some of these things. That's not good enough, right? We have to have a weight of evidence. And if weight of evidence changes a year later, then we just change our worldview. Fine. But in the meantime, we can, like a scientist, you only run with the set of evidence you have at the moment. And that's what we can try and demonstrate, that it's a completely, massively overwhelming evidence for God's existence and for the divinity of the Torah. But again, we're starting just with this one. This one's a very strong piece of evidence or proof. And we had 4 approaches. We had Rabbi Gottlieb's approach, which is that scientifically there's never been a national historical record which has been proved to be false, as long as it has 3 criteria, which is that it's a national tradition, and it's a national tradition of a national experience, and a type of national experience which is obviously something which people will naturally forget. Right, so look at all examples of historical records which have those three criteria. There's never been one which has been disproved. So therefore, therefore the neutral approach would be to assume that this also has no reason to the story of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. Also, it's a historical, it's a national tradition. Obviously, Jews pass this on from father to son in all generations, as we know, and it's of a national experience. The whole nation experienced it, as opposed to if it's just a few people. Yeah, then we do find examples where it can be proven false. We gave an example of Ulysses, was it, or Achilles? I think it was Achilles with the Trojan War, where he says that he saw after he went up to one of the Greek goddesses, she agreed to fight with the people to defeat Troy, and everyone experienced it, but not as you would expect, seeing a big, giant woman waving a sword. They felt a wind rushing through the battlefield, and they won the battle. So again, that's not called a national experience, and it has to be something which people wouldn't have forgotten. And in the case of the giving of the Torah, people definitely should not have forgotten such a massive event like that. Okay, so that's the first approach. Right, and if a person wants to say, yeah, but maybe not, we don't deal with maybes in this discussion, because the burden of proof is now on the what's it called, the antagonist, the critic, the skeptic. That's the word, right? Yeah, the burden of proof is now on the skeptic to say, well, the weight of evidence. Well, you've got evidence at all in one direction. What's your evidence that it's false, that there's a flaw in the story or the transmission to us? Where's your flaw here? And if you can't directly oppose that piece of evidence, then you have to say, on balance, you've got evidence that you've got reliable evidence that the Torah was given as stated. The second one is the Kuzri's approach. The Kuzri's approach is that you cannot get people to believe a story which happened to a huge number of people, and we should know about that story. So in the case of the giving of the Torah, the logic would work like this. If someone would come and tell someone today, let's invent a new religion, let's say 1,000 years ago, the people of, I don't know, let's make up a group of people of northern England, right? Let's say the Geordies, let's say, right? So the Geordies all experienced a massive volcano in the middle of Newcastle town centre, if it was even a city then, right? Let's say 500 years ago, right? A huge volcano, and then God came down and he popped out of the volcano or whatever, or like this scary fiery being, right? And he spoke to them, and this is the message he gave. And then then he went away, and the volcano collapsed into the River Tyne. Okay, whatever, right? So, and you tell someone that now, today, would they believe you today? If you told them this happened just 500 years ago, you would never believe them. Why? Because something of that magnitude, you would have heard some sort of echoes of that story, or be somewhere in your consciousness or your awareness. If you're living in Newcastle or Gateshead, you'd have heard about this. This is the most incredible story which happened to this region of England ever, right? But so therefore, for someone to go and make up such a story, that would be rejected out of hand. So people would never believe such a story in the first place. Similarly here, if you go to the group of Jews, right? Let's say they're an ethnic group, Jews, and you come and tell them one day, you know what, 100 years, 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, God spoke, the only time in history God spoke to the whole nation, that was your ancestors. They would say, no, that's impossible. We would have heard about that. That's something so important that would never get forgotten. Even if it gets forgotten a bit, we would have heard something of it. So the person who tries to invent this story for the first time, he was ready to get shut down, and there would be no traction in spreading such a religion, right? Since it's based on something which people would have known themselves. Which takes us on to the third approach, which is a bit more of a formulaic version of this proof. This is Rabbi Kelemen's first approach. The Rabbi Leib Kelemen, Lawrence Kelemen, he says that basically, if you think of it as a proof by contradiction, this is my interpretation of how he puts down the proof here. Right, this is my explanation, my way of putting it into the way I think about things. Right, what type of proof is it? You've got two options: either it was man-made, or it actually happened. Right, it actually happened. God actually gave the Torah to the Jews at Mount Sinai. Right, now, if it was man-made, there's only three possibilities to what the original fabricator of this story would say. He'll either say God appeared in the past and spoke to the Jewish people, or he'll say God spoke to you in the present, or he says God will speak to you. Right, so we're just basically going to knock out those three options, and basically we're left with the only other option, which is that God actually spoke and it wasn't fabricated by a person or group of people. So let's have a look. If this person fabricated the religion of Judaism and the story of the Mount Sinai revelation, if he said to the first group of people who were to be the beginning of the Jewish people, the Jewish religion, he said, God will speak to you one day. He'll reveal himself to you at Mount Sinai. Then what would we expect, assuming he didn't actually do it, because man-made religion? So we would expect that the format of the story now would come down to us in the same way. So 1,000 years ago, the prophet came and told him that God will reveal himself to us, and we're still waiting for that day. Okay, but that's not what's going on. That is not the narrative which we have at the moment, right? We have a narrative that God did speak to us. Okay, fine. So it can't be future. So this person who invented Judaism, this supposed person who invented Judaism, could he say that God spoke to you? He did speak, but to you, and you should know this. Again, that's the Kuzri principle, and also this is a direct contradiction to Applewhite theory, as we explained, the cult leader, where they did studies on how he was able to, with his charisma, to convince otherwise highly intelligent people. We learn from this that people are gullible. You can convince people, if you're charismatic enough, of anything, as long as, there's one caveat, as long as they can't detect the lie, and they can't test the lie. If they can test the lie, then you can't do that. So he said, in that case, the aliens, which there's an alien spaceship which is going to come down and bring us to Heaven's Gate. They're right, okay, fine, we'll take your word for it. Right? But he didn't tell them the aliens who dropped you off here will come back and take you to Heaven's Gate. So 1 minute, aliens dropped us off here? I know for sure that aliens did not drop me off here. Yeah, I've got photos of me being born just after my mother gave birth and everything like that. I know my upbringing. Not the aliens. They'll be able to test the lie and immediately see it's the whole thing's made up. So therefore, you can't make up a story to convince people who are generally and naturally gullible. That's part of human nature, is to believe. You can't do that if they can detect the lie or test the lie. So therefore you can't tell them something happened to them. Okay? So therefore that kicks out the present possibility that this person who's inventing Judaism can't go to a group of Jews who are not called Jews yet and say God spoke to you. So it can't be God will speak to you, because we would have that version of the story now after it's been passed down. You can't say that God spoke to you, and which would fit in with the narrative we have now, because we believe God spoke to our ancestors, right? But if those ancestors actually were told by this fabricator called Fred the fabricator, right? Were told by Fred that you heard God speak, and that's why we have a record of, or it'll be Moses in this case actually. Moses said to the Jewish people, you heard God speak, and the Jews didn't hear God speak, they would reject it, because they can tell, however charismatic you are, you wouldn't believe that, right? The third option is the past version of the possibilities. That means a person comes to here, it wouldn't be Moses, it would be Fred came to the Jewish people at some point on the timeline, right? And he says 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, God spoke to the Jewish people, right? And here I am to remind you of that, right? So there's two possibilities here. Either he's telling the truth, right? And there was a man in the past who invented the religion. Well, let's say he invented the religion, right? But then that would be a contradiction to present theory, right? Because they would never have believed it in the first place. So the only other option is that he's saying that the religion did start, it got forgotten, and now I'm reminding you of it, or I'm reintroducing it into your history now. Very similar to that Hindu story where the whole nation saw their their deity come down, spoke to everyone, and they all dropped dead in the big war there, right? And then it was forgotten because everyone died, and then a prophet came back later and he told them all about it, right? So if we sort of cut and paste that formula to Judaism, so let's say Fred comes now. He's the individual who tells us about this massive story, and he says one day, many years ago, Moses either told the Jewish people the Torah, or he told the Jewish people, you heard God speak, and they did believe him. They did believe him because they actually did hear God speak. So it's not a problem with present theory. But then they forgot it, unfortunately, right? And now here I am to give the Torah back. Okay, so there's a few problems with that. First of all, the Torah says it won't get forgotten, so he shot himself in the foot. Chapter chapter 31 in Deuteronomy, Pashas Vayelech, somewhere there, it says, the Torah will never get forgotten from the Jewish people. Yeah, obviously it might be individuals who forget it, but from the nation itself, it will never be forgotten. So yeah, so the fact is he wrote that in, so it's a bit of a problem then, right? So he's contradicted himself. And on top of that, the question is, where is this Fred? We have a very good record of Jewish history. Rabbi Kelemen, actually, when he's going through the past theory here, he actually has a whole chart showing every generation from today, going back thousands of years, from pupil to teacher, and who's a pupil of another teacher, who's a pupil of another teacher, going all the way back to Moses, right? And for each link in the chain, he's got at least 4 independent sources to corroborate that link, right? So therefore, there's no way to fit in a thread. So the Torah got forgotten here, and then later on There isn't such a person in our history, and this would be the second most important person in Jewish history, besides Moses. Is the original one who taught us the rest of the Torah after God spoke to us the Ten Commandments. Okay. Or if it's a man-made religion, Moses would be the most important because he's the one who invented the religion. But either way, we definitely would have known about this thread. So past three theories out the window. So therefore, you're only left with the only other option is that the story is actually true and it wasn't made up. The fourth approach is Rabbi Kelemen's second approach, where he says that natural events repeat themselves, and that includes how religions, all to do with anthropology and human psychology, mass human psychology. How do religions evolve? Right? There's a pattern to them. Right? It starts off small with one person or a small group of people, and then once they convince their followers, then you get more sort of followers joining the religion later on, and it expands. Whereas Judaism's narrative is nothing like that at all. The claim is it started off as a massive religion. As God revealed himself to the whole nation, boom, everyone experienced God straight away. Right? Now, besides the technical problems of trying to create such a narrative in the first place, because there are intuitive problems trying to create a mass revelation narrative which is false, as we said in the Kuzari principle, for example, and Gottlieb's approach as well. There's another problem besides that, is that this should be repeated somewhere else in history. There's approximately 15,000 religious recorded religions, I guess including cults and things like that, right, and smaller religions, right? And there isn't a single record of a mass revelation to a whole nation, a national revelation. There isn't one, right? The biggest one must be, if you can even call that a revelation of God, even the supposed resurrection of Jesus, right? Which again is not God speaking to them, but it's a miracle which religion is based on, and it's got 500 witnesses apparently. Yeah, even if we say that record is true, right? But it's still a group of people. It's a relatively small group of people. Talk about a country of millions of people. 500 people is not such a large thing. Yeah, okay, say 500 people joined together to invent the religion, or maybe they saw something, they interpreted it, whatever it is. It can give you a rationale behind it, but we're looking at the science behind it. Every religion starts with an individual or a small group, right? There's nothing anywhere near to a national revelation, nowhere near. So therefore, this is something which is not natural. If it was natural, it would have to repeat itself. Whatever rationale you can give, how the Jews were so clever, they managed to fabricate this national revelation, it must be within the possibility of human psychology to invent such a religion then, if it's a natural thing. So someone else should have been able to do it as well. And the fact that no other religions managed it shows that this is not natural. Natural things repeat themselves. And therefore, that shows that this is my take on Kelemen. He doesn't speak out like this. You can listen to Rabbi Kelemen's version yourself, but this is my play of his idea. So since it's supernatural, right? Since it's not natural, it must be supernatural, because there's only two options. You've got the natural and the supernatural. Supernatural means beyond the laws of cause and effect, right? Because something natural happens because something causes something, and naturally you'll end up with a chain of cause and effect events, end up with a certain result. Something supernatural means it doesn't follow the rules of nature and cause and effect, right? That means it must be coming from a transcendent source, which is above the laws of nature, and everything we know about the world we live in is it's ruled by the laws of nature, except for the singularity itself. But we would say that is kind of God's first revelation, his first point of creation, because before that point of singularity, there isn't any before. There's something which is beyond time, right? Even the Big Bang Theory shows that time started at one point. That means something must have started it, and that thing must be beyond time and space, because we talk about time, right? Something started time, so that thing itself can't be in time. Okay, which is one of the approaches we're going to show later on about the proof for God's existence. Actually, the Kalam proof, I think it's called, if I remember correctly. Anyway, so anything which is supernatural is basically must come from a realm or a dimension which is outside of the world of cause and effect. And that's kind of our definition of God, a being which is outside of time and the laws of cause and effect. Right? How do you know who's God? I don't know who's God. God's just a label we give to that thing which we don't know, which is outside of creation, outside of time. So we've proved our definition of God. We've proved our definition of God. Right? The fact this is supernatural. Right? And let's say the story didn't happen. Right? Let's say it just popped into our heads like as a false memory. But the only way that can happen is through supernatural means. That means God put the thought in our head. Right? So whether the actual story happened or not, it doesn't matter, because God's telling us, I want you to remember this story. Right? Crazy way of looking at it, but it's just showing that you can't get out of this. However you look at it, it would have to be repeated if it was a natural thing. Now maybe you could say, yes, things do repeat themselves, but you talk about historical events. You don't get a religion every nanosecond like you do reactions in science. Religion, you need people to gather together, you need to have a charismatic character, and so it takes time. So maybe there haven't been enough samples to what's the word? To perform our experiment on, right? We don't have enough samples. Right? So maybe if you wait another 20,000 years, there'll be another religion like that. It's just very hard to get it, but it is natural. It's an outlier, but it's an outlier which is within the realm of nature. Okay, so what have you just done? You've just asked a maybe question. Yeah, so we've got evidence that this is unique. We don't know it's not unique. You want to say it's not unique? Show me another example. If you don't, then it's maybe it isn't. So okay, so believe in God for the time being until there's a counterexample. That's what a rational person would do. Say, right, I'm becoming religious. I believe in the Torah. I believe in I'm either becoming Jewish or I'm going to remain a non-Jew who believes in the Torah and God, obviously the God of the Jews, the one who gave the Torah. The Torah is a message to mankind, and it's got the rules for Jews and non-Jews in there. Yeah, of course, the non-Jew doesn't have to convert even if he believes. Right? There's a place for non-Jews in the world as well. According to Judaism, legitimate place. They go to heaven as well if they do the right things. So that's what a rational person should do. Yeah. So yeah, it's unique. It must be supernatural. It must be that this is God-given. Right? And all the other ones, they just follow a pattern, so they're natural. So you could say they're just made up by humans, just like we know for a fact that definitely many cults were just made up by humans, right? So therefore, any world religion runs along that pattern. So therefore, if you've got a 1 in 15,000 chance that this is a fluke of nature, but you've got 14,999 out of 15,000 examples to show that no, this is not natural, right? So you have to have a lot of blind faith not to believe in Judaism. That's what it comes out to. Yeah, because you put all your eggs in the basket of maybe this is a 1 in 15,000 chance. Yeah, right? It's a fluke of nature. So no, but that's not. And of course, if you start going down that rabbit hole, you end up asking problems with science itself. Yeah, science just basically relies on things repeating themselves, right? And we assume they're true because they repeat themselves. And the model we put to them later on, we can reject it if we've got new evidence, or we at least refine it. Like with Newton's laws were refined, they only work in a non-moving state. Einstein shows us a whole other way of perceiving reality, the theory of relativity, whereas one subset of theory of relativity is Newton's laws, but otherwise the laws work differently from Newton. Okay, so those are the 4 approaches we had so far. Now we're going to ask a question. What is the problem which we might have with these stories, with the story of the giving of the Torah? There is a game called Chinese Whispers. That's what we call it in England anyway. Maybe not politically correct, but I think in America it's called the telephone game, where you've got usually at a party, children's party or whatever, where each person sitting in a circle, the first person whispers a message or something to the person next to them. They whisper into the ears of the next person. It goes round, and then the last person hears the message from the penultimate person. Okay, got the message, and he says X, Y, Z, and everyone has a good laugh because it was nothing like the original message, right? So how do you know that doesn't work? That isn't a problem. We see that things can get forgotten even within a minute of the original message being said. And that's a relatively simple thing. It's just a message, just like a 1-sentence thing, about 10 words or whatever. Here you're talking about a vast body of knowledge. You talk about the Torah, you talk about the written Torah, right, which is thousands of verses, right? And then on top of that, you've got the oral Torah, which absolutely dwarfs what's the written Torah. If you go to any Jewish library, you see most of the books there are not the 5 books, because then the Jewish library would be very small, right? And the Tanakh, if you include the prophets and the writings, 24 books, right? Yeah, you're talking about rooms of books, all coming to explain different aspects of the written Torah, right? Which is what we call the Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral Torah. We spoke about this a bit on the Hanukkah lecture we gave this year, Hanukkah number 3, I think it was, about the oral Torah, right? It involves things all the way from the oral explanation of the verses in order that we can keep the laws, like do not do work on the day of the Sabbath, what's called work. So the vast number of laws to do with that. It's probably the biggest body of any law, I think. Yeah, the laws of the Sabbath. There's 39 different types of work, and they're all types of work which actually change the object from one state to another state. So you're doing creative work. You're cooking something from raw to cooked. You're destroying something. Something was a piece of wood. Now you're burning it. You're creating something from potential energy to kinetic energy. I guess you could put it like that in modern terms, right? Right, you're ploughing the ground, you're taking a seed and you're causing it to grow into crops, etc. Right? So how do we know that? That's part of the oral law. The oral law, the oral tradition, the oral Torah includes all those details, and there's a massive amount of details, right? And that's just for the basics. And then you've got grey areas, and that's sort of the Mishnah is the body of the oral Torah, and the Talmud is many of the questions where there's a grey area or there's something not clear about the laws, and we have to clarify that a bit more, right? So that's one aspect of the oral Torah. Then you've got the esoteric, the metaphysical aspect, where you've got deeper ideas which are hiding behind the actual words. You've got exegesis, called drush, where using certain techniques we can derive new laws from the verses, right? So this is very useful in case some of the details get forgotten. So very often in the Talmud, they discuss, okay, well, let's have a look. I think the law's like this, and in a very grey area, and another rabbi argues, and it's all based on how you use your exegesis on this verse in this way, or do you use it on a different verse in a different way, and then each one has to work out what he does with the other person's verse. Many pieces of the Talmud happen like that. Talmud was recorded or written down or finalized about 1700 years ago, something like that. The Mishnah was about 1900 years ago, right, when it was written down. And then afterwards you've got midrashim, and which are other ways of using exegesis, even for metaphysical sort of ideas, philosophical ideas, which you can derive from the verses. Some of them might be purely tradition, some of them might have been new ideas which are used through the tools. And you've got a huge volume of, there's no word for it, it's just it's a vast body of knowledge. And so how can that be passed down reliably? At least the written law and the Mishnah, which is the core of the oral Torah, right? And also the tools and the way to derive new things in case of new situations, like when do you do prayers, when do you do the morning prayer in outer space, let's say, yeah? Or when do you read the Shema? We have to read the Shema twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening. What do you do in a place where it's never nighttime, like in the North Pole half the year? It's just daytime all throughout the summer there, right? So what do you do? So there's always a place where you can understand the point of your question and derive it from a source which we already know about. And that's how you can get arguments, because people can interpret the reasoning behind the source in different ways. Whatever, that's a completely different discussion. Yeah. But the tools themselves have to be intact. Otherwise you get people just saying, I think it means this. Well, again, it doesn't say that. Yeah, that's what I feel. No, there's no I feel in deriving laws or ideas from the Torah. You have to follow the rules. They're logic. They're very logical, the rules, but they're rules which you have to know, right? So how do you guarantee that it comes down reliably? Now, for our purposes in this lecture, you don't need to show that level of reliability and consistency throughout each generation. We're just interested in getting the narrative, the basis of the religion, which is the most central part, that God spoke to Jewish people on Mount Sinai. He spoke out the 10 utterances, or the 10 dibros, the 10 commandments. So how do you show that? How do we know that has come down to us reliably, right? And by extension, all the details as well of all the other commandments, and by extension, all the rules how to derive things, and by further extension, many other ideas which are maybe in the metaphysical realm, which are not written anywhere explicitly, yeah, which really have to be found with a sort of a fine comb, right, combing through the text, looking very carefully and deeply at the structure of the words and things like that, and other methods. So how do we know that it hasn't been forgotten? Okay, that is the question, right? So we've got 7 approaches here, but one of them is kind of tied in with approach we've had already. We had Rabbi Kelemen's approach. It tells us that something which doesn't fall into the laws of the natural world, that something which contradicts the laws of cause and effect, must be supernatural. If it's supernatural, you know it's true. not because the event happened, but the fact that someone is telling a story now, which by the laws of nature cannot be told. Yeah, it's impossible to say a story of a national revelation where you can't say a story of a national revelation. And it was man-made, unless you see it repeated in other societies or somewhere, right? If it's not repeated, then you know the fact that Jews claim. This is the point here. It's a subtle point. I hope you got it already, but the fact that the Jews claim such a story, that is supernatural. Not the event itself was supernatural. The fact that you claim there's such a story itself is supernatural. Yeah, in fact, that's what we said, I think last time we mentioned that. The verse says, has any nation heard God speak to the whole nation? Or have you ever heard a story like that, right? Has it ever happened? And has anyone even said such a story? That shows the story itself is a supernatural thing. So therefore, we don't have to worry about connecting the past event to the present. The fact that we in the present have this story, that itself is a proof intrinsically that the Torah is God-given. Okay, I hope you got that. Okay, right. So therefore, as we said, even if God would have put it in our heads randomly, or however it would have happened, let's say it happened through mass hypnosis, but since that never happened before in history, as far as we know, then this mass hypnosis must have been successful because God wanted it to be successful. Okay, so however you look at it, the story, the fact that we have such a supernatural story, we have such a story in the fact that that which we have a story which has never been repeated on the fundamental way, there's nothing similar to it, that itself is a supernatural event, so to speak. So we're Jewish people are saying the story that God spoke to our nation, that is a miracle itself, you could put it like that. So therefore, it's given by God. You don't have to trace back and make sure that the tradition's intact. Okay, so that's the first approach. The second one, I hope you got that. It's a really clever, subtle idea, and I'm quite happy with that one myself, so I hope everyone got that one, right? The second one is the Ramban's approach. The Ramban says that people do not pass on lies to their children. So therefore, the transition is reliable, simple. Right, we know that especially in Judaism, and probably by other religions as well, there's stress on the family passing down. You tell your children your national tradition, your belief system. You want your children. The children are the most precious people in the parent's life. Right, the most precious thing is a person's children. So therefore, you want to make sure they grow up with the truth. You don't want them to be wasting their life on something stupid. So therefore, people will naturally tell their children the truth. Now, we have to explain this a bit. There's a few points here. That's an intuitive thing, but then there's a lot of questions on it. First of all, what about the other religions? So that means you have to believe the other religions as well. Second of all, don't you have evil people who mislead their children? And third of all, you've got a question that we know that some people tell their children loads of rubbish, like the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and things like that. Okay, so let's address the third question first, because it's the easiest one. Yeah, when we speak about people don't tell lies to their children, of course they tell little lies, as long as it's not going to completely ruin their life according to the way that the parents understand the reality of existence. So let's say the parents know that Santa Claus or Tooth Fairy don't exist, but they'll play a little game with it. It's a bit of fun. And when they grow up, they're not going to base their whole life on it, and they'll find out themselves that Santa Claus isn't real, or Tooth Fairy. Don't want to get anyone upset who does think he's real, but okay, well, Steady on that, right? Or the tooth fairy. Let's stick with the tooth fairy, a bit more neutral, right? Right. So the child's going to find out anyway. So the parents don't mind like playing, going along with the little game. It's a bit of imagination, a bit of fun, right? But in the long term, it's not going to detrimentally affect the lives of the children. Okay, so we're not talking about that. So parents can lie to the children if it's a trivial lie which isn't going to affect them. What about people who are maliciously telling lies to the children? They hate their children. We know that people abuse their children, right? Usually, I would say first of all, when people abuse their children, it's not usually because they want what's worse for the children. They're trying to get out some anger or some bad sort of character trait which they might have, and the children are an easy target. Yeah. Would they go to the extent and tell them you must believe in this religion, and they know it's a load of rubbish? Usually that's more of a well thought out sort of way of damaging children rather than an impulsive, angry one, or whatever sort of emotions cause people to unfortunately abuse their children, which we know that it does happen. Right. Second of all, I would say that's not a normal parent. Yeah, a normal parent would care about their children, right? And unless you see you've got a whole nation of people who totally hate their children, right? Yeah, then it's unlikely then that you'll have a whole nation telling lies deliberately to the children, which ruin the children's lives, right? If you tell children believe in Judaism, yeah, you're completely restricting their whole life to the hundreds of commandments in the Torah, 613 commandments, and the thousands, tens, maybe millions of details of the laws of keeping the commandments properly, right? They have to know all that, and that their whole life's going to be restricted. They're going to, if it's not true, they'll have a miserable life, right? It happens to be, it's quite nice being Jewish. Despite all the restrictions, maybe because of the restrictions, it helps us, builds our character, maybe, right? So we don't feel totally anchorless, right? Right. Side benefit. Yeah, so I think it's unreasonable to say that that's an argument against the Ramban. By the way, the Ramban is Rav Moshe ben Nachman, who, one of the greatest sages of the last 1,000 years. He lived in Spain somewhere. I don't remember where. No, it wasn't Corona. I can't remember exactly where. He was the famous debate with Pablo Cristiani, which was an apostate Jew, who had a debate with him in front of King Ferdinand, I think it was. Right, who was one of the rare occasions where they let a Jew speak their mind, right? And King Ferdinand, after the debate, said, "Yeah, wow, very impressive. I've never heard such brilliant arguments for someone who's wrong." So here, take some money, but you have to leave now because I can't stop people who can persecute you after you've blasphemed the Christian religion so badly, right? Yeah, because obviously the Ramban's arguments were solid arguments, and obviously King Ferdinand can't admit that his religion's wrong because he's a defender of the faith or whatever, right? Anyway, there's a very famous record about that. I think they made a film about it, even about the great debate. I think you can find it if you look for it. Anyway, so there's an absolute genius, very, very holy man, a Kabbalist as well. Anyway, so this is the Ramban's approach. Okay, so we said that we're not talking about lies, sort of trivial lies, which people might give to their children, and we're not talking about the minority of parents who hate their children so much they're willing to destroy their children's lives and lead them on a path, and not just out of sort of impulse, right? This is something which has to be thought out. I believe in religion A. I'm going to teach my children religion B. They're going to be doomed to hell, right? And they're going to have a horrible life as well. Yeah, I'll go to heaven because I'm keeping the true religion. That just doesn't happen, right? Parents generally pass on to their children what they themselves truly believe. Okay? Or they just don't do it through apathy, but they wouldn't go out their way to give them a completely false view of the world if they knew it was false. Okay. So, then we've got the major problem is, according to the Ramban's approach, we should believe all religions then. Because if people don't tell lies to their children when it's something important, so what about all the world religions? If you go to a Muslim, he genuinely believes in Islam. Muhammad's the prophet, who God or the angel Gabriel spoke to him in the name of God, however it works. Right? And his father told him that, and his father told him that, and go all the way back to somewhere along the lines. With Islam, it's a bit more complicated because we know there are a lot of forced conversions. But okay, let's assume it goes back to a time where eventually there were people living in Arabia at the time, and they witnessed Muhammad give his edicts and his prophecies. Right? Let's assume that was true, and these people actually are from a tradition which dates back to Muhammad. Or the same thing with Christianity. Let's say a person has a chain of ancestors which goes all the way back to ancient Jerusalem, where I think that's where Jesus was when he gave his prophecies and stuff like that. And they witnessed, let's say they witnessed some of the miracles he did, or they witnessed his teachings, or things like that, or even the resurrection. Maybe let's say he's one of those theoretical 500 people who witnessed the resurrection. Right? Let's say there is such a thing. So I'm playing devil's advocate here. Right? Let's say one of the original pupils of Buddha, what was his name? Siddhartha Gautama, right? Yeah, when he came up from meditating by the tree, and he told them all about the amazing experience he had of the 8th level of transcendence, right? And they all witnessed that, right? All your descendants from the Jewish people, right? You trace it all the way back to the original story, and they heard God speak. So, according to the Ramban, surely you'd have to believe all those stories. And my approach, I don't know if it's controversial if you think about it, but yeah, I believe in every one of those stories. Yeah, I think it's good reason. Why not? I've got no problem with believing that Muhammad came down from a mountain and told his people that God spoke to him, or Gabriel spoke to him, right? I don't have a problem with Joseph Smith Jr. saying that the angel, right, that Joseph Smith Jr. came along and he said that the angel spoke to him, gave him the golden tablets with the translation book, and here's the Book of Mormon, right? Or that this person got up from the tree and he said, I reached the 8th level of transcendence. I believe all those stories. Yeah? But the problem is, even if you believe those stories, they're not convincing. They don't tell you with certainty, or without even with a level of reliability, that what these people are claiming is even true in the first place. If someone's sitting there for like 2 hours with his eyes closed and then he gets up, I've reached it. I've reached the 8th level of transcendence, right? People are gullible, right? Yeah, he could be lying. Why couldn't he be lying? Yeah. What the people in the Buddhist religion, if they had a tradition directly from Buddha, that's the man, that's what he's called, as far as I know, I stand to be corrected, but my knowledge can go off sometimes of other religions. He made a claim, and you'll have to take his word at face value. Yeah, he's telling the truth. Why? Oh, he's a wonderful person. He's so kind, and he's so honest in his dealings. So he seems to be an honest person. All right, but at the end of the day, you do have thousands of other religions to choose from. Yeah, each one of them has got a holy prophet, a very fine character, right? Except for one I can think of, right? I'm not going to mention, don't want to get in trouble, right? The character didn't seem to be a very nice character. So whatever it is, it could be. But if you're there at the time of Buddha, so fine. So yeah, I believe that Buddha got up from the tree and claimed that. But why should I listen to him? I believe that Muhammad came down and said, yeah, I got a message from Allah, right? So yeah, I believe that story. Yeah, everything written in the Quran, yeah. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, Muhammad said this, Muhammad claimed that. But the problem is, why should you believe that Muhammad's telling the truth? Maybe he made a mistake. Yeah, maybe he had hallucinations. Whatever it was. Maybe he was outright lying. We don't know. Right? The fact is, at the end of the day, he's a human being, and you're listening to a human being. You have to take his word to believe the religion. You have to assume that he's telling the truth. If he's not telling the truth, then the religion doesn't even start. Yeah. Same thing with let's say this is a much harder example relative to the others because it's more impressive. You got let's say you witness the resurrection of Jesus itself. Let's say you Paul's son. Let's say the son of Paul. I'm not sure if he had any children, but let's say Paul's son, and he said, Jesus appeared to me in a vision on the way to Galilee, from Galilee to Jerusalem or something like that. And Jesus appeared to me after he was crucified, and he told me the whole message, and he told me to spread the message of this new teachings of Jesus, right? And he told his son, right? This will be a very important message. I don't think anyone knows they're descendants of Paul today, but okay. But let's say there theoretically was. So what would this person legitimately believe? I believe my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather claimed that Jesus spoke to him. Okay, does that make the religion true? No, Paul could be making it up. However, when it comes to Judaism, what is the claim? The claim is that God spoke to my ancestor. That means my father's father. What did he claim? Did he claim that someone told him that God spoke to the Jewish people? All right, so go back a generation then. He must have been one of the people who God spoke to directly. So that truth which a person passes down to their children, in the case of Judaism, is God spoke to me. Right? And it wasn't just one person. The whole nation says that. And that is a very serious claim, right? And that's going to affect the children permanently and the descendants forever if you keep this religion going now, right? So we assume they're telling the truth. God spoke to me, right? And the whole nation. So if we were there at the time, what would we experience? We would experience God speaking to us. Whereas all the other religions, they'd experience a person saying that God spoke to them. Okay? Good. Okay, so that's the Ramban's approach with the questions answered. Okay. So now we've got a third approach, which kind of follows on from the Ramban. Is we looked at the Rabbi Gottlieb's approach. It's tied in with that as well. But the question is, do we really doubt other religions' transmissions? We know that people are very committed. If they believe something, they're going to pass it down. Something as important as their eternity, they're going to pass down. People will be very dedicated to preserving. And the default assumption is that things which are important will be transmitted accurately. Right. I think that's another way. That's another way of putting the Ramban's approach, basically, but it's slightly different. You're saying that people go out their way to preserve their religion, not just would they tell a lie to the children. Not only would they not tell lies to the children, they'd go out their way to actually tell them the truth, to make sure they remembered that truth for for generations. We know in Soviet Russia, it wasn't just Jews. People, they were not allowed to teach any religion at the pain of going to Siberia or worse. And we know that they had secret meetings where they learnt. There's a beautiful story once. They found a copy of the Shulchan Aruch, which is a code of Jewish law, right? And I can't remember where I heard this story. Yeah. I think I know where, but I'm not sure. Right? They were learning the Shulchan Aruch, which is a big one. I've got one of the volumes here. If anyone wants to see it, yeah, here you go. You've got my bookmark there. That's the Shulchan Aruch. This is basically the code of Jewish law. In the middle, you've got commentaries on the side going to the finer details. Right? This is one volume of, in my version, it's about 17 volumes about this size, right? They're talking about each one's got about 550 pages, right? So it's a lot of information. So he had one volume, and finally he got to speak to a Jew from outside Russia, an Orthodox Jew. And he said, wow, I know all these laws about Kiddush, right? I know it has to be done with a cup. The wine has to be filled up to the top. Kiddush is the benediction we make on the wine as the Sabbath comes in, right? So before we have the meal, we make a blessing on the wine, right? We thank God for the wine, whatever blessing is. That's another discussion, right? And there's many details to, like any law in Judaism, there's lots of details to it. Yeah? So, but the funny, he asked a question. I know everything about Kiddush, except what is it? Right? He let all the way there. Because the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, assumes everyone knows what Kiddush is, but how do you do Kiddush properly? Right? Right? So basically, Kiddush is, they say benediction, and doesn't actually write down the text of the benediction in the Code of Jewish Law, because it assumes that everyone knows it. Right? So they were passing that. They were so diligent in preserving, trying to learn as much as they could, and preserving that tradition, despite all the oppression. They couldn't keep the laws of Kiddush, or any of the laws. That would be too hard. But at least make sure you pass on as much as you can. Yeah, and we know the Christians as well. They were very dedicated in keeping the Christian religion alive, despite the communists banning it and things like that. So I think it's reasonable to assume that most religions, since it's such an important part of their life, people who are actually properly religious, not just what's it called? Lip service, that's it, yeah. Not talk about people who are just like in England today, basically a person, a Christian, for example, it's just lip service, it's not real. Yeah, they don't act in that way, don't even go to church or things like that. Right? Similarly, other traditions, you get many people just don't take the religion seriously, but they still call themselves that religion. We talk about people who are seriously religious, and this is a very important part of their life. They would generally, I keep messing up that word, generally, not genuinely. They would genuinely pass on the tradition unbroken. Right? Maybe that's why I was getting mixed up, because two words go together in this context. All right. So our default. So therefore, our assumption is not like the telephone game, not like the Chinese whispers. Our default is that people will transmit things as accurately as they can, since it's important. Now, I'm sure if you take the Chinese whispers example, telephone game, and everyone knew that if you got the message words perfect, everyone gets £1,000, right? And it doesn't have to be the first time. You can you still have to be in a series of 50, let's say 50 people, right? But you can corroborate it. You can let the person say it back to you to make sure you got the text exactly right. Then number 2 says to number 3, and they can spend a minute or two making sure they got the message absolutely right. And they go around the whole thing. Yeah. In that case, I think intuitively would say the telephone game would end up with the correct result. Yeah, and even more so when you talk about people's eternity and the whole reason of their being is based on what people's idea of what the truth of their religion is, they would make sure that that gets passed on properly. Okay, that's the third approach. Fourth approach is, right, in Judaism, we've got a mandate to preserve our tradition, and we're warned severely, do not change it. Right? A couple of examples. One of them is the beginning of chapter 13 in Deuteronomy, the very first verse there. It could be in the Christian Bibles, it could be the last of chapter 12 possibly. Right? And there's another one in the fourth chapter of Deuteronomy as well. You must not add on to it and you must not detract from it. Right? So therefore, remember, especially whether it's true or not, that's what we're trying to decide here, trying to prove, so we can't use that in the equation. But the fact is, if you look at Jews now, the way that we perceive what our religion is meant to be is something we have to keep consistent and conserve and preserve the religion. Right? Make sure if someone's trying to add something new to the religion, we get like a sort of like a allergic reaction. The bells start ringing. So, what this person's doing something new here. Careful. Is this all in line with the tradition? Just showing a new way of looking at things, but it doesn't really contradict the religion, the basis of the religion. For example, the Hasidic movement, right, from about 300 years ago, is very controversial at the time. They started doing strange things, which was not part of our tradition, right? They started focusing more on the emotional and connection aspect of service of God rather than putting a stress on the technical, and that led to people doing things in the way where didn't seem to be fitting the letter of the law and things like that. And there was a very, very, very big backlash against it. Now, 300 years later, we realize that no, these were not a group which was diverging from core Judaism. It was part of core Judaism. It's just they were emphasizing something which was already there. They were just putting an emphasis on it. Right? We're taught to love God, so they put an emphasis on focus on loving God, right? Like when we do the commandments, right? Right. So if we have a look at the consistency of the laws and traditions, right? Right, we see that things do not get changed in Judaism. They just don't. Someone wants to introduce a new idea, we are very, very, very skeptical, extremely skeptical. We're pedantic about even the smallest details, right? Because we understand that God gave it to us, and if God gave it to us in this form, changing one iota of it is disastrous. Okay? Anyone who's Jewish already, who's gone to synagogue, would know this. I'm a bulker. I'm someone who every week on the Saturday, on the Shabbos, we take out the scroll, right? A few times a week, but the main reading is the Torah portion of the week is on the Shabbos morning, and we read out the scroll, which is basically the 5 books of Moses, and we read it in the original Hebrew without any vowels, without any cantillation notes, right? So you have to basically, there's a certain sort of like tune to the words, right? And if someone makes the smallest mistake, the whole synagogue, if they're listening, shouts out, "No, correct it." Yeah, that's, the famous one is a Pashas Tazri Matzora. Yeah, that's the one where the nightmare of people of the cantors, the ones who read the Torah scroll for everyone else to listen to. Yeah, there's so many words there which change from the masculine and the feminine. So you got who means him and he means she. Okay, it's a bit confusing for people who don't speak Hebrew, but right. but they're written the same letters. So you have to know, oh man, is this a masculine one or is it a feminine one? Negatzoras, he, and everyone shouts, who? Right? So they correct you on the tiniest mistake, right? Even though it doesn't really change the meaning that much, because we know that every detail is essential, right? And holds infinite significance. Yep. Right. Or, for example, I had many times, so you can see how pedantic I am, we've got two letters. There's thousands of rules of details in how to write a kosher Torah scroll. So one of the rules is, if two letters are slightly touching each other, so let's say you got let's say in English you've got an O and an O. Let's say in the scroll they're written with black ink. Let's say they're slightly touching each other, they're very close. You look carefully, there's a tiny hairline of ink connecting the two. That invalidates the whole scroll. It has to be fixed. Right? Right? So you have to, oh, I think they're touching. And then you get a few people coming and saying, everyone's looking, they're taking their glasses off so they can look carefully. Right? Because every detail makes such an important, it's so important. Okay, so we see from here that, leaving other religions out, Judaism itself puts such an emphasis of not changing things. Do not change things. Make sure the tradition is intact. Pass it on exactly how it is to the next generation. Right? Obviously, there are cases where you have to be innovative. Like what happens if you don't have space rockets, and now you've got space rockets? You have to know what the law is to do with the prayers. When do you keep the Sabbath? Yeah, there's no sun to base when day and night is now. Yeah, because you see the sun the whole time if you're in a space rocket, right? Do you work it out based on Jerusalem's times? Do you work it out based on the time, the place where you left? Let's say it was Florida, so do you have to keep Florida times for the days and the hours? Yeah, different ways of looking at it and different proofs for each opinion. So that is a good reason in itself to believe not just the narrative that God spoke to the Jewish people, which is such a fundamental, right? It's a reason to believe even the details. So even more so, the most important thing which we want to preserve is the fact that God spoke to the Jewish people. So that's why it's extremely reliable, the Jewish tradition, that with all the details, on the first day of Sivan, which is the third month in the Jewish year, the Jewish people arrived at the foot of the Mount Sinai. We know what happened on the second day, on the third day, the fourth day, and on the sixth day, God spoke to the Jewish people, right? There's actually a difference of opinion there whether it was the sixth or the seventh, all dependent on whether the previous month was a 30-day month or a 29-day month. That's a different discussion, yeah? But it was definitely 50 days after they went out of Egypt, that's for sure. Okay. Right, okay, so therefore we know, because of the pedantic and attention to detail and sort of almost obsessive attitude to preserving the tradition from one generation to the next, it's extremely reliable, the chain of events. And if there was any change along the way, we would know about it. Like, we've got examples where people change things and we know who they are, and we know whether they're still within the general spectrum of Torah observant Jews, or they've actually gone off and they've basically gone their own way and not we would not consider them as Torah observant anymore. For example, like the Reform Jewish movement, right? We know clearly they've gone completely off. They rejected the keeping of the commandments. So yeah, okay. So that's not Orthodox Judaism. They're still Jews, but their version of Judaism is not Judaism, right? Similarly with Christianity, you could say with Christianity as well, right? They change things so radically that we say we just reject it. Yeah, what you're saying? God is a man? Something as fundamental as that, the Jews definitely see through that. That's an obvious one. Yeah. So anyway, and you're getting rid of the circumcision. You're saying we don't have to keep the laws anymore, right? Okay, so they're just like the Reform movement. We say, well, we just throw it out of hand. These are heretics, or whatever we want to call them. But this is not Judaism as the conserved, as our fathers kept it, as our grandparents kept it. This is something new, and it's diverging radically away from the original Judaism, which we've been preserving for generations. Okay. Now, number 5. We're near the end. Okay. Number 5. What's number 5? Right. So how do you know the Jews are capable of preserving the tradition? So, very nice that we're very pedantic about it, but who says that we're able to? Okay, so we know that the Jewish people have always been, I talk about always here, a extremely highly literate people, right? Throughout generations, we've always put an emphasis on study and learning, whereas other religions and other societies, they put a stress on learning a craft, doing things hands-on, how to practically live their life, how to survive. The main focal point in Judaism is study of the Torah, right? It's the most important commandment. If you can say there's a most important commandment, the main focal point of Jewish people is being able to read and translate, if it's not your natural language, Hebrew, and to understand and to study. And in fact, we're commanded to study every single second. If you want to be really, really technical, every second where we don't need to be doing something else, right? Of course, relaxing is part of that calculation as well, because people need to relax, mental health, all that sort of stuff. But if it's unnecessary, get back to the books, right? So, and therefore, even the people who are, let's put it nicely, on less intelligent side, even they've got a level of being able to read and learning things on a basic level. All right, they might not be able to learn the Talmud or the Mishnah. Maybe that might be too hard for them. They can learn the 5 books. They can learn the written Torah, the Chumash. They can learn Jewish law. Yeah, because they've got to know how to keep the different laws. Obviously, they have to learn it as well. They might not be able to read, but they can listen, right? So even those people who are not literate, they've got their focal point as well, is study, right? Now, this is in stark contrast to many other, I'm not sure if it's all other religions. I think maybe Islam was not like that. I get the feeling that Islam might have had a lot of people who couldn't read as well. But I think Islam were quite good at getting people to be literate and be able to read, as far as I know. Which is ironic, because apparently Muhammad couldn't read. But I guess it's a bit of an irony there, according to them, as far as I know. Therefore, we don't have to rely on our rabbis to teach us, right? Or as the other religions do, they have to rely on their clergy. We've got the clergy class, which is like 5 or 10% of the population. Yeah, or the sort of aristocratic. They're the ones who are taught the more fine things in life, like philosophy, reading, things like that, literacy, right? And they're able to read the books themselves, right? However, most of the people are the ignorant workers, right? So how do they know the truth of their religion? They have to just accept it from what the clergymen tell them, right? That's why you end up having terrible situations. You have like people where the clergyman has something against the Jews. He says, the Jews are contradicting this thing in the Bible or whatever, or in the Quran. You have to kill them now. How are they meant to think differently? If this is the most important thing in their life, is their religion, their belief in God, and I've got no way of knowing what God says besides this clergyman, this imam or this priest, whatever, they have to follow him, right? Right. So in Judaism, You don't have that problem, right? In other religions, it's much easier to fabricate something if most people don't have access to the knowledge. But with the Jews, first of all, we all have access to knowledge. All we need to do is not just we all have access to the books, right? They're for public use in the synagogue, or people usually have their own collection at home, right? The only question is, are they able to read? And most Jews, even the ones who have difficulty reading, will be able to read on some sort of rudimentary level. Right? So therefore, it's very hard for bad actors, this is the point here, to get into the tradition and start twisting things. Because you don't just have other clergymen, other rabbis shouting at you. You'll have the man on the street, the worker shouting at you. So what are you talking about? Say, we're allowed to eat pork now? Where'd you get that from? Get out of here. Heretic. And you know, the wagon driver or whatever, Uber driver, yeah, we'll just throw him out the community himself. Right? Yeah. So what we're saying, because we got such an importance of studying the Torah, it creates a very solid and reliable framework for preserving our traditions. Yeah, other religions, where they were illiterate, it would be easy for the leaders of the religions to add things in, little diktats or interpretations of their religions, and the populace, they wouldn't have any recourse to challenge it at all, right? And that was set up an environment which is ripe for abuse by the leaders, right? In fact, we know this happens. The leaders of religions will end up, well, if I can abuse it, let's make it for my benefit, right? Let's put things which benefit me into the edicts of the religion itself, right? Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, or what belongs to Caesar, or something like that. Yeah, who do you think put that rule in? It was the Roman Catholics, the Roman emperors, right? Who wanted to get tax money. Let's put it in the Bible. Let's add that bit in, right? Right. So they can, and the thing is, the elite, who maybe deep down realize the whole thing's a joke, they feel free to just like violate the religion themselves. Yeah, the hypocrisy. You see that all the time, right? But okay, I'm not getting into that. Definitely in politics, you see that a lot. You know, people standing up for like the Constitution of the United States. Yeah, we believe in defending democracy. Why? By silencing free speech, right? So you can't say that because there's a party in Germany now, right? AfD, right, which wants more freedom of speech and things like that, and they don't want to be dictated to by the European Union and stuff like that, and letting in all the immigrants. So they generally believe in more freedom, as far as I understand. I'm not an expert on this, right? But then there's a movement by the far left to shut down, to even ban the party, the second most popular party in Germany at the moment. They're trying to ban it to defend democracy. So democracy means you go after the majority or everyone's got representative for their views. And you got the second biggest portion of the German population wants this ideology. So no, we have to ban that. Why? Because democracy. It's self-contradictory. It's crazy, right? Or people who want to clamp down on freedom of speech because you give people the wrong ideas, and that will affect democracy negatively. Again, people who are in power abuse power, right? However, in Judaism, of course you have that in Judaism as well, but it's much harder to get away with it in Judaism because you can't just start making stuff up and hope that a couple of your friends like let it go. You're going to have to let the whole Jewish people who hear this, they're going to know that you're making something up a bit ridiculous, right? Or heretical. Okay, so that's a bit different from number 4. Number 4 was the Jewish people their ideology is to preserve. And number 5 is the Jewish people are very literate, and in fact, our commandment, our primary commandment, is to teach father to son, not teacher to pupil, right? As it says in in verse 7, right? Yeah, chapter 32, verse 7 in Deuteronomy. It says, remember the days of the world, understand the years of each generation. Ask your father, and he will tell you, your elders, which means like the sages, and they will say to you. So we see that it puts the father relationship to the son before the teacher to the pupil. That's a primary focus of the Jewish people, is passing on from father to son. In the beginning, well, near the beginning of that famous chapter 4 in Deuteronomy, you should tell it to your children and your children's children, the day which you stood at Mount Sinai. Right? So our tradition is focused on telling the children. The whole idea of the Passover Seder, right? Every year, the families come together. The father tells the story of the going out of Egypt to the children, and then when they grow up, they'll have their own families, and they tell it, pass on that tradition. Yep. So we can see that since it's a family-based religion, the tradition's family-based more than clergy-based. It's much more reliable and more immune to having people changing things, right, and abusing it for their own purposes. Okay, that's a nice approach there. Right, number 6. Okay, let's get it on as usual. So if we want to see the consistency of the Jewish traditions, right? So let's look at the Torah scrolls themselves, right? The Torah scrolls is where we have the record of the stories, the written record at least, not the oral one. Obviously, that is passed on orally, right? As we said, like in the Passover Seder, the Passover meal, the Seder night, right? But written, let's try verifying the account of the going out of Egypt and God speaks to the Jews at Mount Sinai purely from the text. How do we know the text has been preserved properly, right? So if we have a look at Torah scrolls from around the world, remember there's no printing press. You're talking about something like, was it 5? Yeah, I've got the number here. 304,805 letters, right? And each Torah scroll is written by a scribe, a sofer, following, as we said before, very strict rules and traditions, right? Which have been passed down. That's the. If you just look in like the Code of Jewish Law, which I showed you, there's a whole big, not massive, quite a big section all about how to write a Torah scroll and the rules, how accurate you have to be. And especially this rule, you're not allowed to write down a word until you've read it from another Torah scroll. So read it, Bereshis in the beginning, then you write Bereshis. Okay? Bara, Elokim, God creator. So Bara, Elokim. You have to read you're not allowed to do anything by heart. You have to always look in another kosher Sefer Torah scroll and transcribe it, read the word, say it out with your mouth, right? And then the letters, I've got the all special form. There's lots of details on how to write each letter. It's very precise, right? Sort of like a calligraphy sort of level of writing there. Yeah, look, maybe I'll show you a picture. Okay, I found a random example here. So if you have a look at, yeah, you see like this is Vov Yud Dal. This is God's name here. Look, there's a lot of precision, like the squareness of certain parts of the letters. Some of them are slightly curved. You see this one here, it's diagonal, then it goes down vertically, right? There's lots and lots of different details. Right, I accidentally paused the video, so I don't know where I'm up to. Oops. Okay. So hopefully this will make sense in continuity-wise. Right, so we were saying that the Jewish Torah is, the scrolls are 304,805 Hebrew letters, right? And the accuracy of it is astounding, because in all the scrolls we have today around the world, they're all exactly the same. If there's one which is slightly off, it's actually buried, or it has to be corrected, right? And what happens if we put a special belt around it to show this one needs fixing? Don't use this one, because this one is invalid. Just because it's got one letter difference, or it's got two letters touching each other, like we said before. Right? There was one version of a Sefer Torah which had one letter difference, right? And that was, I think, more commonly used in German Jewry. They had one word which is dako, which is an aleph, daled kaf aleph, as opposed to daled kaf hey. Either way, you find forms of the word dako with an aleph, and you find forms of it with the word hey. So it's a very, very small difference. It doesn't change the meaning at all. But yet there's one letter difference, right? And now most Jews take on like the other version where it's a hey. I looked out for it once, as I'm a counter myself. So I looked out for it in an Ashkenazi scroll, which was written more recently. It was written with the hey. So now all Torah scrolls are all written in the same way now. The Taimanid Jews, however, they were separated from the Jewish, the majority of the Jewish people who went into exile in other places. So you had they were kind of isolated from the rest of the Jewish people for 2,500 years approximately, more or less. They did have a bit of contact, but not major contact. Their Torah scrolls, I think my friend told me, I think he's a Taimani, he said there were 6 differences. You have 6 differences between the Yemenite or Taimani Torah scrolls and the bulk of Jews today, the standard Jewish Torah scroll, yeah, and even those differences were very small. As opposed to, if you have a look at the New Testament, or I guess the Quran as well, I'm not sure, you have to get someone to verify this for me, but I know for the New Testament, for example, there's huge differences, yeah, between different versions, right? I'm not just talking about translation, I'm talking about originals. When they get copied, changes happen. That's what happens when people transcribe things. Things get changed. A person wasn't concentrating. After you got tens of thousands of words and letters, you write the wrong letter here, whatever, wrong word, or you said, or you sort of like paraphrase something which you should have copied out precisely. These things do happen, right? It's normal if you're transcribing a text over and over again, mistakes will creep in. But you see the incredible accuracy of the Jewish scrolls, because we've got all these rules, and obviously got God's what's it called? It's hashgacha, God's divine providence to make sure that the Torah is preserved. We've got an astonishingly accurate Sifrei Torah. So therefore, anything written in the scrolls are probably very, very reliably going to be the same as Moses' original Torah scroll, which all scrolls are ultimately copied from, right? Where he wrote 13, he wrote one which was put in the Ark of the Covenant, and another 12. He wrote one for each of the 12 tribes of the Jewish people, right? So it's astonishing accuracy. So therefore you can assume reasonably, I would say very, very confidently, that these Torah scrolls are the same as the original Torah scroll which was written by Moses, right? And it had to have been copied from something. So let's say a person made up the religion. What's he writing this Torah scroll from? He just gives you a Torah scroll from out of thin air with the rules of how you have to copy it. So people ask, well, 1 minute, if you're just part of the tradition, where's the Torah scroll you copied it from? Where are you getting this Torah scroll from? Yeah? If you're claiming that it has to be preserved so perfectly, and this is based on Moses' one, unless Moses himself was the one who made it up, right? We know he's the one who wrote down the Torah scroll. So you're agreeing that our tradition goes back to Moses. The only question is, when Moses wrote down the scroll, in that generation, right, did they believe Moses that he wrote down the Torah scroll accurately? Well, when they read it, and they would read in this Torah scroll that God spoke to the Jewish people, to you, to that generation, again, you've got the Kuzri principle, or you can't lie to a person on such a blatant lie, which they would know themselves. So therefore, the fact that we've got such accurate Torah scrolls itself shows that our tradition's unbroken. Okay? You could go further, you could look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, where they're extremely, talk about 2,000-year-old scrolls here, which have been buried. So you should expect in Jewish law, a Torah scroll which is irreparable, right? Because it's got too many mistakes, you bury it, right? Or if it's got one of God's names written incorrectly or in the wrong place, you can't correct that because you can't rob out God's name. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, yeah, it could be some of these invalid Torah scrolls because of the small differences, and we do see in some of the books. We do see slight variations in the letters there. Right? It's not clear. Sometimes it's because it's been faded over time and stuff like that. But for the bulk, the accuracy and the similarity to the Torah scrolls we have now is astounding. And that was one of the big things. Oh, these Dead Sea Scrolls! Wow, it corroborates our Torah scrolls. It wasn't just written out of nowhere. They must have had these Torah scrolls, the ones we have today, or copied from copies, which go back at least 2,000 years, which is only 1,000 years after 1,300 years after the giving of the Torah itself. So we know that the links are very, very reliable, just based on looking at the Torah scrolls. Finally, I would say it's probably the most important one, is looking at the traditions. We already mentioned this before. If you look at the commandments written in Torah and the reasons why we keep them, a vast number of them are to remember the going out of Egypt and God saving us and giving us the Torah. It's incredible. So therefore we have to put a scroll on our doorposts. So we pass by it every day. Whenever we walk through a door, yeah, and it's a tradition to touch it and to kiss it, right? It's got 2 paragraphs. The paragraph of Shema, which we gave a lecture about that. I think it's one of the Keystone lectures even. I think it was number 3B. I think it was, right? About the oneness of God, the declaration of the oneness of God, right? And in there, right, there actually doesn't mention the go out of Egypt actually. Yeah, so that's a bit different. Okay, fine. Right, it's got 2 of the 4 paragraphs which we have in the tefillin, the phylacteries. The phylacteries are boxes which we tie onto our arm with leather straps every day and put on our head. The box, and in these boxes you've got 4 paragraphs, and 2 of them, not the ones from the Shema, which we have in the mezuzah. The other 2 actually speak about putting this as a sign on your arm and as a memory on your head to remember that God took you out of Egypt. So, and when do we do this? We do it every day, and in the strict letter of the law, we should be wearing it the whole day. There are people in Jerusalem who actually, you see, they go round. If you go in the old city, you'll see these people who actually wear the tefillin publicly. Usually nowadays we only wear it during the morning prayers and then we take it off. because our bodies are not clean enough. We're not so careful about thinking about things which we're not going to be thinking about when wearing these holy boxers. But besides that, you're meant to be wearing it the whole day. So this is a constant reminder. Why are we wearing this? God took us out of Egypt. Okay? When did we start keeping this commandment? Think carefully. When possibly could this commandment have started? And it's written in the Torah. Already established that the Torah, that from approach number 6, which we just did, the accuracy of the Torah can tell us with confidence that it's the same one as Moses wrote, the original Sefer Torah. So if that's true, and it writes, put these sign on your arm and on your head in order to remember the going out of Egypt, right? That has to have been started at the time, at least when the Torah was written already. So when they started wearing, the first generation which started wearing the phylacteries, the tefillin, was the same generation where that Torah scroll was written, and there it says, remember going out of Egypt. Now, if they didn't go out of Egypt, why are they giving this any credence at all? Let's just reject it out of hand. So it shows that, yeah, of course, we went out of Egypt. Okay, you want us to remember it? Great idea. Let's make sure we put a sign on, make sure every day, so it never goes out of our consciousness. Okay? The other laws, the ones which come more occasionally than daily ones. Right? We spoke about the Passover Seder. What happens? We come round, the whole family, just like we did last year and the year before, right? And we say, God took us out of Egypt miraculously. He gave us a Torah on Mount Sinai. He brought us into the land of Israel. And we do this every year. We dedicate a whole night. And in fact, there's a whole 7 or 8 day festival which is meant to remind us of this as well, right? Besides Shavuos, then we've got 50 days later, we've got the festival of Shavuos. We gave a whole lecture about Pesach and Shavuos. I'd like some more views on that. It's my least watched video on my channel, right? The 3-part festival about Pesach and Shavuos. It's a beautiful ideas. So I highly recommend it. Plugging my own videos in my own video. I think I'm allowed to do that. Right, so what happens on Shavuos? We read the Torah portion of Exodus chapter 20, where it speaks about the 10 Commandments. Right, and God spoke to the whole nation, saying, I am God, the Lord your God, who took you out of Egypt. Right, because it was God speaking himself. Right? So we've got the different festivals remind us of these events. So when did this tradition start? Remember, we keep very good records, right? I think Seder night, there's always a Seder night. We know when the Haggadah, the text we read, right? It's called the Haggadah. I think we know around when it was what's the word, formulated, right? When the text was actually formalized, right? This is a formal text which we should base our telling of the going out of Egypt on, right? But people had the Seder night before that, right? Put it like this. Let's put it in a different way, right? If I'm passing on this tradition to my children this year, please God. So, did I do it last year? Yeah, I must have, yeah, because every year I have to do it. So eventually you go back. When I was a child, I was at my father's Seder, right? I remember my grandfather there as well. And his and we can presume that the same pattern happened with my father. When he was growing up, he was by his father's Seder night table, right? And his father was telling about the going out of Egypt. And then his father was a child once with his father. So again, eventually it goes back. So when do you start such a thing? Use your imagination. When can you start such a tradition, such a strong tradition, which is based on verses, explicit verses, right? Yeah. And you should tell your children on this day, saying, because of this, God took us out of Egypt, right? In the Exodus chapter 12, I think. So, who was the first generation? It's very hard to answer that question unless you say the first generation was the generation it actually happened to. I'm trying to play devil's advocate. I can't think of a way it could have crept in otherwise. Come on, you have a thing. Any suggestions? Maybe a miraculous voice coming from the comments section from the future. Say, no, maybe it was this. I really can't think of how could it have happened. So the only other possibility, theoretically, would be that someone invented Judaism and he told everyone to keep these traditions every single year and every day. People would ask the question, if this is a tradition which we have to keep every day to remember it as an unbroken tradition, that's the whole point, it's unbroken, so you never forget it, how comes we forgot it? According to you, it's been forgotten. Fred, right? If this is the Fred again, the one who's inventing Judaism, you can't go and tell us keep this every year. In our historical records, we'd have to hear the very first Seder night was 2,200 years ago in under the Greek persecution. One of the Hasmonean kings said, "We have to remember the going out of Egypt now." We don't have any records, anything like that. So you can safely assume that it was done every single generation until the original generation, which was the generation of the giving of the Torah, and obviously the Jewish people going out of Exodus, going out of Egypt. Right, okay, so yeah, and there are many other commandments besides those ones which commemorate things. So I heard, I couldn't get a hold of it, it's a cassette tape. There was, if you can, there's an organization called Seed, and they have something called a challenge seminar where they actually go through a whole process of showing the reliability of this story, which basically the last two lectures I've been giving, I've been trying to do the same thing, but they've got a different method, and they do it sort of countering the other way around. They ask the audience, let's say you've got Holocaust deniers today, right? Holocaust deniers. How can you, and you think it's really important that generations to come, they're going to know about the Holocaust and the terrible things happened, never forget, never again. How are you going to guarantee that? We said, well, it's such a terrible event. How can it naturally ever be forgotten? No, 1 minute, wait a couple of hundred years. You've already got people now who are Holocaust deniers. First of all, they say it wasn't 6 million. They say it's maybe a few 100,000. And they'll eventually all start getting forgotten, right? Right? Maybe you go. If it's a national tradition, which is a national experience, it won't get forgotten, right? So we see the truth is the mainstream people do not forget the Holocaust. But let's say you wanted to make sure they didn't forget the Holocaust, right? I'm not talking about people who are outside the religion. They can start doubting it, right? Because it's not their tradition, right? But let's say we want to make sure that we don't forget it. So people gave all sorts of examples. So they said, well, one person said, well, to remember the Holocaust, maybe what happened, the Jewish people had to wear yellow stars. So how about we make everyone wear a yellow star, right? In the morning when you get up, as part of your daily routine, you put on the star, right? And you let's make a declaration, right? Just so we know what the stars represent. This is the star which the Nazis persecuted the Jews. They forced them to wear the star. And there's a whole text. Let's say make a whole text, a formalized text. Okay, that's a good idea. Let's make a Memorial Day every year where we get together and everyone puts on the yellow stars again, and they do something to... They play out the story of the persecutions. They wear the striped whatever, the striped jumpsuits or whatever they wore in the time of the concentration camps, right? And everyone takes an axe or something and chops a piece of wood or something to commemorate the hard work the Jews had to do in the concentration camps, right? So let's do some token motions, and we tell over the story. We mention the names of the places, right? And we read out poems. Like we actually do this on Tisha B'Av, right? There are some certain poems, certain lamentations, I think you call them, right? Yeah, which were written more recently to commemorate the Holocaust, right? Right. So yeah, would that be good enough? Would that be good enough? Right. So let's make it obligatory for every Jew to sit down with the family, so no distractions, once a year, sit down, and there's a whole structure to the thing, so therefore everyone gets into it, and it's not just like a ADHD person saying, right, you got to tell the children, I told them, then let's go out now. No, you got to sit down, right? For the first 10 minutes, you got to say this, and then you got to go on to the thing, and then you go on to the what led up to the Holocaust, and then you say the names of the 10 people at the Nuremberg trials who were convicted, whatever, right? And whatever it is, right? If you listen carefully, that's exactly what we do with the going out of Egypt. These people who are not religious yet, they gave these examples of how to make sure you don't forget Holocaust, right? Wearing the yellow star, we wear the tefillin. It's even written in tefillin why we're wearing it is to remember the going out of Egypt, which is probably worse than the Holocaust. The bondage in Egypt is probably much worse. If you know what sort of things happened there, terrible. Not just physical, there's spiritual bondage as well, right? That's another discussion. Yeah, maybe we do one. We're reading those portions at the moment. Maybe we'll do a lecture on that. We'll see if I get round to it. Make a commemoration every year, and everyone has to sit down, say a certain text, remember these things, right? So all the things where a person would go out of their way to make sure a certain event in their history will not get forgotten, the Jewish people do that. We already do that. And it's written in the Torah that we're meant to do it. So there, it's quite beautiful the way it's sort of like that. Well, you do that 1 minute, so look at Judaism now. We do all of that. So if you have that perspective, Judaism is one of the most reliable religions there are, because anything which you can think of to preserve the truth of a religion or preserve the truth of a historical event that you can think of, try it at home now, right? Or wherever you're watching this. Try think of something which you would do to guarantee that you don't forget the Holocaust. You'll find an equivalent in the Torah of the remembrance of going out of Egypt and the giving of the Torah. Amazing, right? So therefore, I think they call it Failsafe. I think that's the method they use there. Beautiful idea, yeah? Which is basically what we said in number 7. I'm not sure if this is an 8th approach, but it's a clever approach to help drive it in, to make people, oh wow, it's not just theoretically, oh, did it really happen, and it must have been an unbroken chain until the original event. Do it from the other direction. Let's say you were at the event, let's say not a supernatural one, like the Holocaust, right? And try making sure that people don't forget it in the future. Right? So you do these like 5 things, right? And they will guarantee that the Holocaust never gets forgotten. Okay, that's exactly what God did when He gave us the Torah. Yeah, He gave us a number of things to make sure we never forget it. Okay? The focus on preserving the tradition. Don't change anything. Make sure you're all literate. Make sure you all learn the Torah. Right? Make sure you remember it every year. Right? Put the boxes on your head which have written in it the story of going out of Egypt, the remembrance of that, right? Right? And make sure you pass it on to your children, right? Don't just rely on the Ramban, Rav Nachmanides, that naturally people will tell the truth to children. Make sure you make a point of it. Be proactive in passing down the tradition. Okay? Very good. Okay, so hopefully this is another 7 or 8 approaches. I'm going to call it 8. I'll cheat for the title of the video. 8 more approaches, how we know that the transmission from the event of the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, and also by extension the exodus from Egypt, which happened 50 days before God spoke to the Jews at Sinai. How do we know that transmissions come down to us reliably? Okay, so let's quickly recap it. Right, so we had the first approach was it doesn't matter whether it really happened, the transmission is intact. The fact is, according to Kelemen's second approach, the fact that we even have such a story is unique, shows it's supernatural, which means it's given by God. So even if it didn't actually happen, the fact is that God wants us to know this, so we just work with whatever knowledge God's put in our head. Yeah, but more likely it is that it's supernatural because the original story actually happened. Okay, so either way you're safe. The second approach is the Ramban's approach, Nachmanides' approach, that a person doesn't knowingly tell lies to the children which would negatively impact their lives on a serious, significant level. The third approach is, and therefore other religions, yeah, we would also theoretically believe them as well, but the difference is, what are they claiming? They're claiming a person spoke and said that God spoke to him, whereas in Judaism, the original event was that they heard God speak to them, right? That's the experience of the ancestor of the person who's got this tradition. God spoke to my ancestor, as opposed to, unless you're a descendant of Paul himself, right? That Jesus spoke to my ancestor. He heard the Sermon on Temple Mount, or my ancestor heard Muhammad speak. So you talk about hearing a person speak, not hearing God speak. Okay. The third approach is that we don't doubt there's no reason to doubt the transmission of a religion's narrative, the transition itself, the story itself, whether it's useful or not in determining truth. Again, we already addressed that. But the transmission, people are very dedicated and are willing to sacrifice their lives in order to pass on the tradition intact as much as they can, right? So our default assumption is that people are going to take the most important thing in their life, which is the basis of their view of reality and what's going to happen in the next world. They're going to take that more serious than anything, and they'll go out of their way to make sure the transmission gets passed on. The fourth approach is that looking at the Jewish people's mandate to preserve our tradition, right, and the consistency in our laws, and how pedantic we are about any detail, and how vicious we are against people who try to stray away from the tradition which we've conserved until now, right? Which tells us that each generation before us probably had that attitude as well. Doesn't come out of nowhere, this attitude, right? Why am I so pedantic, right? Because I've learned how important every detail of the Torah is, and we see the accuracy, the different, all different aspects of my learning, where I've learned the importance of precision in the Torah, right? In the ideas of the Torah, and then literally the details of the mitzvahs, the commandments, tells me that I have to teach my children to be precise as well, right? And to make sure we don't change anything. And I speak, don't be like that group of people who changed things and messed it up. So that probably gets traced back in our national psyche. Don't change things. And you've got, obviously, some people are more innovative, some people have doubts, so they'll go off the way. But everyone else will hopefully try making sure that you don't make that mistake. Okay, the fifth approach is that the Jewish people have always been very literate people, right? And so the whole Jewish people are not relying on the teachings of a few sages, and we're vulnerable to their whims. No, we have the ability to analyze and critique and ask questions. We always, I mess this out, we're always encouraged to question as well, right? So therefore, if there's any doubts, we try catching them out, and we iron the problems out. Yeah, we don't take things lying down. We don't just mindlessly accept things, right? We are encouraged to challenge and ask questions. Yeah, so that sets up a very healthy society of questioning and literacy, where it's very hard to start bringing new stuff in without it being critiqued or just like creeping in without any resistance. The sixth approach is just looking at the Torah scrolls themselves, how consistent they are throughout the world, and even tracing back thousands of years. For example, the Yemenite Torah scrolls were from about 2,500 years ago, at least their tradition till now. Yeah, it doesn't make sense that they had inaccurate scrolls then, and then they suddenly became more accurate now, right? Even though we did have one example of that with the single letter between the Ashkenazi scrolls and the rest of the world's scrolls, right? That's just one letter. And also look at the Dead Sea Scrolls. Look at the accuracy of the Tanakh, the portions of the Tanakh which are in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Look at how similar they are to our current ones. So it makes sense that if they're accurate on such a on such a detailed level, definitely the general narrative of the going out to Egypt, that's definitely at least more or less correct. Right, and God speaking to the Jewish people, because you're going to have to change more than just one or two letters to completely create this new idea of God speaking to the Jewish people, right? It's not just going to be like, he wrote one letter instead of another. That wouldn't change things. Yeah, you'd have to change verses, right? Number 7, if we look at the structure of the Torah and mitzvahs, there's a certain theme which runs through all of it, is to remember the going out of Egypt, to remember God speaking to us at Sinai, right? So therefore our tradition basically safeguards the tradition just by the structure of our keeping of the commandments itself is deeply connected with preserving the tradition. So when we put on the phylacteries, when we go to the Seder night, when we have the mezuzahs on the door, right? When we sit in the tabernacle in the sukkahs to remember the time in the deserts where we had the clouds of glory. I'm sure you will listen to that very long lecture about sukkahs, right? About when we sit in the tent, the outdoors, right? The schach. I think I did one on sukkahs. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did. Yeah. Sabbath is to remember God creating the world, right? Again, that's another thing, right? And we kept the Sabbath in that very first generation, and that's very hard to just throw in. Something as deep in the Jewish psyche as keeping the Sabbath, which is probably the most fundamental commandment we have, besides not serving idolatry and studying the Torah. I would say those are the top 3. Yeah, Jewish people keep the Sabbath. The way we define a Torah observant Jew is he Shomer Shabbos? Does he keep the Sabbath? If he keeps the Sabbath, yeah, he's good. Why? Because he testifies the truth. He knows that God created the world, right? Also, it's a memory of the going out of Egypt as well, right? Keeping the Sabbath as well. It's also to commemorate going out of Egypt, right? We're told that's one of the reasons to do that, right? How? That's a different discussion. Lots of different commandments all keyed in with this idea of remembering. And we have the very final 8th approach is, let's reverse it. Let's look at the skeptic and ask him how he would preserve a different event, a historical event. And they will inevitably end up coming up with some very clever ideas, right? Wearing something to commemorate it, wear it every day even, right? Have a text to read every day, have an annual commemoration, right? Maybe a weekly commemoration as well, not so big as the yearly one, but yeah. And everything you would do, right? So write that on a piece of paper, and then look at each one, and you'll see that that's already what we do in Judaism. So Judaism's already got those safeguards, those fail-safes in place to preserve the tradition. So we can be very, very sure that our tradition is very reliable. And hopefully that's it. So if anyone's got any questions, I might do a third lecture trying to answer anyone's questions, but I hardly get any comments. So let's hope that people ask some good questions where it's worth having a third lecture. Otherwise, we'll probably be going on to a new category, or maybe subcategory of evidence for God's existence and divinity of the Torah, which is not the giving of the not the giving of the story of the giving of the Torah itself. Yeah, so hopefully wrap that up. So in total, we've had 12 approaches to to prove that the story of the giving of the Torah is reliable, and which shows obviously that God exists and that his message to mankind is the Torah, right? Why doesn't it get changed? We already addressed that last time, yeah, because that's, if you believe the text of the Torah is true, which we've demonstrated in a number of these examples, that the text of the Torah is reliable. The Torah says itself, it will not get forgotten, it will not be changed, the laws are forever. So any religion claiming that, yeah, I agree with the Torah, yeah, but I think God changed later, but God precluded that explicitly by saying these commandments are forever, they're for every generation, right? And in case of Christianity, the idea of the Jewish people being rejected is also excluded, like we said last time in Deuteronomy chapter 26, right? That even if we rebel and God punishes us severely, puts us into exile, yeah, he will never annul the covenant with us. Okay? So therefore we know with almost absolute certainty that the events did happen, right? And we can rely on them, right? And that the Torah does not get changed along the way, right? And the Torah warns us, do not change anything, right? So therefore we can be pretty confident that the Torah we have today is the original Torah which was given to us at Sinai and in the desert 3,337 years ago. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'd love to hear your feedback, and yeah, hope to see you in the next video. Bye for now.